All right, so we're going to talk about tweens today. And there's four different types that we're going to work with. Really three, and then like an adapted version of another. We'll talk about the classic tween, which is basically taking a simple shape and shaping it and just basically shifting it from changing the translation and getting it from point A to B, or in this case, B to C. Um, then we'll have a shape tween, which we'll get into. It shows how you can take a little bit more complicated things and um, taking simple shapes and colors and letting animate kind of morph between um, the two things. So shape tween, and then we'll get into um, a um, motion tween. And so with that, you're going to work with the same object. You can change the scale. It will work with scale. But if you try changing shapes, it's going to break this motion tween and you'll end up with multiple motion tweens, which doesn't quite get the same effect. It would just be a little bit more complicated to do. So this kind of shows like, it gets smaller, maybe shows like more about the space, like it goes back into space and it comes up again and gets bigger. So that's a motion tween. And then we'll get into also show a motion path. Okay, so two different things and kind of creating a path for an object to actually animate on would be kind of cool to use. So those are some of the basic tween properties that we'll deal with in our little tutorial today. So let's start with creating a new. So if you show up here, we're going to do a new file. And let's start off with creating a full HD. And so if whatever shows up here is not the same as what I have, then you can change these. I make this 1920 standard, I 1080. Okay, so make it 1920 and 1080. Your frame rate is going to be 24. And this is what we'd call like a full HD version. But make sure frame rate is 24 for standard frame rates, and we'll go create. And what I have here is my timeline and my workspace or my stage. And I'm going to start by making a classic tween. So I'm going to click down here and relabel this classic. And all my animations for these are going to be about 2 seconds. So I'm going to click on the 2-second mark here and hit F5, which is insert basically frame. So I have a blank keyframe here, which is that little empty circle, and ready for animation. So I'm going to start off with some basic shape. It doesn't really matter what this is. And I'm going to just use my rectangle tool here. You can change your color and fill. You can also just draw this out wherever you want. And that is my point A. So there's my keyframe now. It's solid, so it's keyframe. And I'm going to go to point B, and I'm going to create a new keyframe over here. I can either click right here, insert keyframe. So there. And I'm going to move this object over somewhere else. Okay. Now, sometimes if you click away and you click back on it and you try to drag it, notice it takes the fill but not the stroke. So you'll either have to drag select over everything if it's not grouped together, or you would have to double click. So double clicking on something and move it around somewhere else. So simple, point A, point B, boom, boom. And then I'm going to right click anywhere in this empty space where I want to create a tween. And I'm going to go to create classic tween. It says, hey, you need to convert this to a symbol. You say, okay. So now it turns it purple and it has an arrow, boom to boom, right? And so boom, boom, simple. Not a whole lot of changing in shape or color, anything like that. Doesn't really work with a classic tween. So if I go back to this sample here, this is what happens if it gets too complicated. If I change this cloud from white to gray, notice the shape kind of changes, and then to darker gray, and the shape changes again. And I go and I create a classic tween between these two things, and I go to play it, it sticks, and then it changes, and then it sticks, and then it changes. And so it doesn't quite tween, right? So it doesn't quite work when you're changing color or shape with this type of object or this type of tween. This is a simple translation tween, basically from point A to point B, or if I wanted to create a new point in here, I could do that as well. And so that is a classic tween. And so I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to lock down and hide my first classic layer. I'm going to rename this one shape, because I'm going to use the shape tween on here. And I'm going to create a new shape. I'll change my color and change my stroke. And let's take a look at some other tools I got here. I've got an oval tool. All my shapes are going to be underneath this one thing here. And I'm going to draw out my shape here. And that's great. I'm going to go down some frames, and I'm going to insert a blank keyframe, which is F7. Or if I hold here, I can see here's a blank keyframe right there. And I'm going to create a new shape and a new color, just kind of show what this tween can do. So I'll create something up here. I'm going to move down the line again, and I'm going to hit F7. And I'm going to create a new shape, a new color. So let's try this poly star tool. And you have an option. You can change it for poly or star. I'll start with poly. Got 10 sides here. I'm going to make it go down to 7. Pick a new color, pick a new stroke, and create something right here. A new size also. I'll move down the line here, F7. And let's try that same tool. But let's look at, let's see, we're a polystar tool. So I'm going to click on tool over here, and I'm going to change it to star and jump the points up. We'll make a really intricate looking star. But I created it. But what if I want to change the color? I can go use my select tool and select just the fill. I can change the color here. Now if I go back and change the stroke, look what happens. It's only going to change that one stroke. Okay, I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to double click on my stroke, and now it highlights all of my stroke. And I'm going to change the color together. So there we go. And one last one, F7. And let's say I go back to rectangle tool and bring it back to choose some different colors here. That is a terrible combination. So let me try something else. Try this. All right, there we go. So now I've got my shapes, pretty random looking, right? I'm going to right click in between any one of these, and I'm going to go to shape tween. And now it's going to shift it from one point to this point. And Animate does its best job to keep everything intact, right? So I'm going to do the same thing for these. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try holding Control and clicking in each one of these empty spaces, and then I'll right click and go to shape tween. And now it's automatically added it to all those spaces. So I like how that kind of twists and turns. That's cool. So I like how that kind of shrinks down. So that's some cool morphing going on here. And Animate does its best job to do this. Now, it won't work so much with a character because it gets too complicated. Let me show you here in this example. Here is a shape tween. All right, that works just fine. Now, if I wanted to create something, shapes that change like this, it's not really too complicated. It doesn't look too complicated. But I hand drew this, and I made this with like artwork that is just drawn with the pencil tool and filled in. So it doesn't look too complicated, but it doesn't quite work, because if I go to create a shape tween here, it kind of mangles it. It doesn't know how to compute the strokes that you're dealing with. So if it kind of looks abstract, which really isn't terrible, but it doesn't quite do what we want it to do. So I'm going to try this and do shape tween and see the effects. So it does get from point A to point B, but look at how scrambled it gets. It looks pretty trippy, which in its own way is kind of cool, being kind of abstract animation. But it doesn't get that smooth tweening that we want from object A to object B like this does. So this is good shape tween here. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this one motion. And here we go. Hide and lock my other layers, and let's create a simple, I'll do a star with not so many points. And let's change my color of a star, customize this, and let's change it up. Let's put it here. Okay, so I got my shape, and things can animate off of your stage too and come back on. It's not a problem. And that's the case with, I'll try that out with this one here. I only need one object here, okay? I'm going to right click here for a motion tween and just go straight to create motion tween. And it says you want to convert this to a symbol and say yes. And so now it's a symbol. It's got this blue box around it. And what this really means is it's all bound together. So now, let's see. Now this object is all bound together. So it doesn't matter how I click on it. It's going to grab everything. So it's kind of grouped. If I wanted to change something, and also if I want to change something about this shape, then what I would have to do is click into it. So I double clicked on it. So now it says scene symbol 1. So it is a symbol here. And if I go to my library, here's my symbol. And I can customize this. I can call this star. And now it says I'm inside the star. Okay. And now that I'm inside the star, I can go and I can change the fill, and I can also change the stroke and the stroke size. So I can make changes within this. It's not locked down permanent as this. And so you can go into a group and you can edit things within it. And you can also notice that my timeline has changed. I can also animate within symbols too, but that's getting into a different thing. We'll get to that later. So it shows up here what I'm actually in. I'm in scene 1 and I'm in star. So I'm going to go back to scene 1. And for motion tween, what I want to do is just slide my time slider marker down, and then I'm going to move this. Notice it creates a path, and it creates a little dot for each frame that I'm covering here. I'm going to move this down, and let's do shorter time, but further away. And notice what happens now. It's going to move faster because it's got to get from this point to this point to this point. All of these are frames, right? So you're changing the time and space, changing your object location within time and space. That's basically what a keyframe is. So I'm going to move down my time here. And let's say I'm going to move this way, but I'm also going to rescale it. So it says position and size, width and height. What if I did this, scaled this down, scaled that down? I can lock it to make sure that it's in proportion. So as I scale it down, maybe it looks like it's going back into the distance, right? And then maybe my next one, it's going to come up closer. I'll move my timeline and I'm going to move this over here, but I'm going to scale it way up. In your face kind of thing, right? So boom. So like that. So now I've got this crazy thing happening, all this path all over the place, and it's going to follow that path, right? That's pretty cool. Another cool thing about this is that I'm going to use my selection tool, and if I get close to this path, I can see it gives me options that I can alter the path. I can either create curves on these straight lines, or I can change the placement of these little anchor points. So I can go back and adjust this, add some curviness to things. So it's kind of cool. I can just like squeeze it like that. So it goes, shoots back. Maybe this animates off the screen. So now, boom, 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 and it comes back right around again. So motion tween right there. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call this one path. So my path. And I'm also going to create another layer for this one. And I'm going to call this one animation, and that's because that is what I'm going to animate, is the word animation. So back on my path layer, go back to frame 1 here. I'm going to lock and hide my previous layers. I'm going to use a pencil tool. If you don't see a pencil tool, or you're missing some tools that I have here, click on this 3 dots here, and you can drag these tools over to your toolbar, and they'll be there for use. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use, let's see what that looks like. That looks good. I'm going to create a path. I'm on my path layer, and I'm on my first frame. I'm going to create just a weird loopy path. Whoop, there we go. And I want to change this path to a guide. So I right click on it and go to guide. I'm going to go to animation here. And I haven't used my text tool yet, so I'm going to use my text tool. I've got a fill color already added in here. I've got a character. I've already got, if I click here anywhere, I'm going to put in animation. Now I've got this funny font used here. But now I can double click on this, highlight it, and I can change things about it, change the options. I got different options. I've got different size options. I can change this here. So if I, highlight this, don't do that. I use my tool here and change the size. Come on. Why won't it let me change the size? Let's try it here. There we go. Made it a little bit larger. You can change your font type here. I downloaded this one, so it's not going to be found on yours. But you can download fonts pretty easily. So I've got my font, I've got my text, and I want it to follow this path for this motion. For this motion path is basically what this is going to be. And I've got it set up. And what I want to do is grab this animation layer, and I want to tuck it underneath this path. So it's not going to be here, it'll be here. So it's kind of tucked up underneath it like this. Now I've got it set on point A right about here, okay? Now that it's set as a path and I've got its starting point, I'm going to right click inside of here and choose Create Classic Tween. Yes, I want it to be a layer. Now it fills it with all these little dots. It doesn't know where it's going to go. It's just, it kind of snapped into place up here at the front of this path, but it has no endpoint. So at the end here, I'm going to press F6. Now I've assigned a place for it, but I want it to be back here at the end. I want to kind of snap it into place back here. So now when I play it, it follows that path. It kind of traces it around everywhere. And that's what I want. So I've got my path. And since it is a path, when I go to preview it, it doesn't show up, right? Because it's just a reference. So that's kind of cool thing about these different tweens is that you can kind of hide some things about it. It helps save some time with shifting things around. And you got to know which one to use for the right type of object and what you want it to do. So this path, though, is not going to be as customizable as the other. I can change it a little bit. It's a little bit more difficult to make changes to, maybe. So I can adjust this, and it'll follow the path if you go back and change it. But for the most part, I can also change the size of this as well. So if I change the scale of this to get smaller as it goes further away, it'll get larger as it goes back the other direction. It gets smaller this way. So motion path, motion tween, it just depends on what you like. Kind of customize your path a little bit more by hand drawing it out. So that's tweens, basic tweens for animate. We'll see you next time. Have fun with this, and later.